Mission is a go.
She did not scream when they broke her. That is the part nobody talks about. Everyone imagines the scream, the long, ragged thing that tears out of a person when the worst moment of their life arrives. But Maya Reeves did not scream. She went quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when the body decides that sound is a luxury it can no longer afford, when every nerve is already occupied and there's simply no bandwidth left for noise. She just looked up at the sky. It was a Tuesday. The sky was that particular shade of washed out blue that belongs only to late October mornings. The kind of sky that looks like it has already given up on the day before the day has properly started. A sparrow was sitting on a telephone wire above her. She remembers the sparrow. She remembers thinking, even as her legs stopped working, even as the weight of the truck's rear axle settled on her like a verdict. She thought, that bird has no idea. That bird had absolutely no idea. Here is what you need to understand before this story goes any further. Maya Reeves was not a victim before that morning. She was a 31-year-old physical therapist who ran half marathons on weekends, who kept a cactus named Gerald on her windowsill, who made the best jerk chicken in her zip code, according to everyone who had ever eaten it, which was a lot of people, because Maya cooked the way some people pray, constantly, generously, like it cost her nothing. She had a laugh that made strangers turn around in restaurants. She had plans. She had so many plans. And the men who took those plans from her, who left her in the road like something disposable, who drove away while she lay there with the sky and the sparrow and the silence, those men had a plan too. Their plan was that she would stay broken. What they did not plan for was her brother. What they did not plan for, not even a little, not in any version of their thinking, was Marcus Reeves' 6 feet 2 inches of quiet, controlled, specifically trained lethality, who got the phone call at 0600 on a Tuesday morning while he was doing pull-ups in a base gym in Virginia, and who stopped mid-rep, and who listened to the whole thing without saying a word, and who then very carefully set his phone down on the bench and finished his set. Finished his set because Marcus Reeves was a United States Navy SEAL. And Navy SEALs do not panic. They do not rush. They do not make emotional decisions that compromise the mission. They plan, they wait, and then they move. And when they move, the people who thought they were untouchable find out in very specific and very personal ways exactly what that word has always meant. This is the story of what happened to Maya. It is also the story of what happened to the men who broke her. But mostly, it is the story of what happens when you look up at a washed out Tuesday sky and decide somewhere in the part of you that pain hasn't reached yet, that you are not done, that you are not, no matter what they said, no matter what they did, no matter how many bones they left in the road, hopeless. Maya Reeves had been awake since 4:30 that morning, which was not unusual for her. Sleep had always been something she negotiated with rather than surrendered to, a treaty, not a surrender. She would give it 5 hours, sometimes 6, and then her body would simply decide that lying horizontal was no longer an efficient use of resources, and she would be upright and moving before her alarm ever had the chance to do its job. She made coffee first, always coffee first. The machine she owned was older than 2 of her friendships and louder than all of them, and it sputtered and hissed like something personally offended by the hour, but it produced coffee that tasted like the specific combination of ambition and warmth that made mornings worth entering. She drank it standing at her kitchen window, watching the street below her apartment fill slowly with the gray beginnings of an October day. The leaves on the oak tree across the road had gone the color of old pennies. A cat she recognized, a fat orange one that belonged to the woman in 4B, was sitting on the hood of a parked Honda with the philosophical stillness of something that had resolved all major questions about existence. Maya had a full day ahead. Her first patient at the clinic was scheduled for 8, a retired postal worker named Earl who had been recovering from a hip replacement with the specific stubbornness of a man who had spent 40 years walking 12 miles a day and was not prepared to accept that his body had renegotiated the terms. After Earl, she had 6 more patients back-to-back until 3, then a staff meeting, then the grocery store, then cooking. She had promised her neighbor Diane the jerk chicken. Diane had reminded her 3 times in the last week, which Maya found endearing in the way that only truly lonely people are endearing. All that need compressed in a casual repetition. She had plans for the evening after Diane. She had promised herself she would call Marcus. She had been meaning to call Marcus for 11 days. This is a thing about people who love each other but live inside very different kinds of pressure. They mean to call. They carry the intention around like a stone in their pocket, aware of its weight, constantly thinking later, later, after this, after that. And the stone just gets heavier and the calling keeps not happening. Maya and Marcus Reeves had grown up doing everything together and then grown into adults who lived in completely separate categories of the world. And the gap between their daily realities had become something that required effort to bridge. Not because the love had thinned. The love was the same. But explaining your day to someone whose day involves classified information on one side and someone else's hip flexor exercises on the other requires a certain translation energy that is not always available at 9 o'clock at night when you are tired and the couch is right there. She finished her coffee. She changed into her running clothes, black leggings, a faded Howard University sweatshirt that was on its 4th year and its second hole worn through at the left elbow in a way she found she didn't mind. She did a brief stretch on her living room floor, touching her forehead to her knees with the easy confidence of someone who had been doing this since she was 19. She tied her sneakers. She set her apartment key in the small zipper pocket of her leggings, next to her ID and her debit card, because Maya Reeves was the kind of person who ran with her debit card in case she wanted to stop for something on the way back, which she almost never did, but the option mattered. She went downstairs and stepped out into the October morning and started to run. The route was one she had run probably 300 times. Down Clement Street, left on Marcus Avenue, which she had always found faintly cosmically funny, given. Right on Powell, down a long slope toward the waterfront path, 2 miles along the water, then back. 40 minutes, maybe 45 if she took the longer return loop through the park. Her feet knew the route the way her hands knew her own face. She did not have to think about it. That was the point. Running was the one place where her brain, which was otherwise employed at full capacity every waking hour, got to be quiet. Got to just exist inside her body without managing anything. The first 20 minutes were like that. Good, clean. The air had that October sharpness that felt like the world had just been rinsed, and her breath clouded faintly in front of her, and she found a rhythm that felt right, her ponytail swinging, her sneakers hitting the pavement in a tempo that matched something she couldn't name but recognized. She was on Powell Street, starting the downhill slope toward the waterfront when the truck pulled out. It came from a side street to her left, a white delivery truck, commercial, the kind with a high cab and a long box at the back. And it pulled out too fast and too wide, the rear swinging into the road the way the backs of big vehicles do when the driver miscalculates the turn, that slow, ponderous arc that looks almost gentle until you understand its mass. Maya saw it. She did the thing a person does when they see something coming, and their body responds before their mind catches up. She tried to stop, tried to reverse direction, planted her left foot hard and twisted, and the physics of the moment did what physics does, which is not care about anything you want or need. Her foot caught on a raised edge of the curb she hadn't seen. She went down. She went down sideways and wrong, and the rear wheel of the truck, still swinging, still completing that long, lazy arc, came over her left leg below the knee and her right leg at the thigh. Then it stopped. The truck stopped with its weight on her. And for one long moment, there was nothing, no pain, not yet, because the body in its mercy sometimes gives you a second before it tells you what has happened. And Maya looked up, and the sky was there, that washed out Tuesday blue, and the sparrow was there on the telephone wire, and everything was very, very still. Then the pain arrived. It arrived the way a building collapses, not all at once from the top, but in a sequence, a cascade, one thing failing, and then everything below it failing, and her mind, which was still running on its quiet morning rhythm, tried to process what was happening and simply could not scale to it. She heard herself make a sound she had never made before and has not made since. Not a scream, something lower, something that came from further inside. The truck door opened. She heard boots on the pavement. 2 sets. She turned her head and saw 2 men standing behind the truck, looking at her. One of them was young, maybe 25, a thick neck, a face that was doing something she could not read. The other was older, heavier, with the specific look of a man who has spent years making calculations and has become very good at them. He looked at Maya the way you look at a problem that has presented itself in an inconvenient moment. She said something to them. She doesn't remember what. Her mouth was moving and words were coming out, and She believed she was asking for help. She believed she was saying please and phone and possibly hospital, though later when she tries to reconstruct this part, the words have the quality of things heard through water, present but muffled like they happened to someone slightly to the left of her. The older man said something to the younger one. The younger one looked at Maya one more time. They got back in the truck. The truck moved forward, the weight lifted, and this was its own category of agony, a new and specific thing. And it drove away, turned right at the bottom of Powell, and was gone. Maya was alone on the slope with the sky and the sparrow and the sound of her own breathing, which was very loud, and the October morning, which continued to be beautiful in the specific way that beautiful mornings have no obligation to suspend themselves for the suffering that happens inside them. A woman found her 7 minutes later. A woman named Patricia Chun who was walking her dog. A beagle named something Maya never caught. And Patricia Chun was the kind of person who moved immediately toward a problem rather than standing at the edge of it. And she was on the phone with 911 before she had even fully processed what she was looking at. She crouched next to Maya and took her hand and said, "Stay with me." Stay with me in a low, steady voice of someone who has had emergency training or simply has that kind of constitution. And Maya, who was trying very hard to stay with something, held her hand and looked at the sky. The ambulance came. What happened in the ambulance is something Maya can report only in fragments. Hands, voices, the specific fluorescent quality of the interior light. A paramedic with a mustache asking her questions she answered without knowing she was answering them. The particular sensation of moving through streets she knew without being able to see them. The sound of the radio. Someone's latex gloves on her wrist. She was not unconscious. She was something else. Present, but compressed into a very small point inside herself, like a person standing in a room that is slowly getting smaller. At the hospital, they took her back fast, which she later understood was not a good sign in the specific way, that being taken back fast to hospital is never a good sign. It means the outside of you has communicated urgency in a language that does not require words. There were doctors. There were lights. There was a woman with a clipboard who asked her name and insurance, and Maya gave both. And then the woman with the clipboard asked if there was anyone she should call, and Maya thought of Diane downstairs waiting on the jerk chicken. And she thought of Earl at 8 o'clock who would have no idea why she wasn't there. And she thought of the phone call she had been meaning to make for 11 days, and she said, "My brother." She gave him Marcus's number. She knew it without having to think. Had known it since she was 8 years old, and their mother had made them both memorize each other's numbers by repeating them at the dinner table until the numbers were as automatic as their own names. She had updated it every time he changed it over the years. She did not know what time it was in Virginia. She did not know what he was doing. She knew only that there was one person in the world she wanted to know about this. One person whose voice would function as a specific kind of anchor. And it was him. They wheeled her into surgery at 6:43 in the morning. The last thing she saw before the anesthesia took her was the ceiling, white, institutional, a long panel of fluorescent light with one small dark mark in the upper right corner that might have been a scuff or a stain, something ordinary and incidental, the kind of thing that accumulates on surfaces over time without anyone deciding it should be there. She looked at it and thought, with a strange clarity that sometimes comes right at the edge of consciousness, that she didn't know yet what her legs would be when she woke up, that she was going to the other side of this moment not knowing, and that she had to go anyway. She went. In Virginia, Marcus Reeves was on his 37th pull-up. He did them every morning in the base gym at 0550 before the room filled, while there was still enough quiet to hear his own breathing and count without interruption. He liked this hour, liked the particular quality of early morning effort, the feeling of earning the day before it had properly started. He had been doing this since BUD/S, since the training that had made him into what he now was, and the habit had outlasted everything else from that period. The bunkmates, the specific miseries, the instructor whose name he had finally allowed himself to forget. The pull-ups remained. His phone was on the bench below him. It lit up at 6:02. He finished the rep he was on, 38, 39, 40, and dropped and picked it up and looked at the screen. Unknown number. Virginia, area code. He almost didn't answer. Then some signal that does not have a name, made him press accept. It was a nurse. He listened to everything she said. He asked 2 questions. How serious? And is she conscious now? And received 2 answers that landed in him like objects dropped from a height. things with weight and trajectory. He said thank you. He ended the call. He set the phone on the bench. He looked at the pull-up bar. He finished his set. Then he sat down on the bench in the empty gym and let himself be still for exactly 45 seconds. He counted while everything inside him did what it was going to do. There's a thing that happens in people who have trained themselves into a particular kind of operational calm, a thing that looks from the outside like no reaction at all, and is from the inside a very controlled demolition. Everything coming down in the right order, the dust settling before you are in motion. Grief and fury and something that was neither, something more specific and more dangerous, moving through his system like weather, like a front passing through. 45 seconds. Then he stood up. He picked up the phone. He made 3 calls in 6 minutes. His commanding officer, his team leader, a woman named Angie who handled logistics and could make things happen at hours when things were not supposed to happen. He requested emergency leave. He was told he had it. He packed a bag the way SEALs pack. Methodical, fast, nothing unnecessary, nothing missing. He was in his truck and on the highway by 6:41, 2 minutes before his sister went under the knife 3 states away. He drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off and thought about what he knew, which was this. His sister's legs had been crushed by a truck. The truck had driven away. There were 2 men. The hospital had his number now. He thought about the men. He did not think about them in the way that most people think about the people who have hurt someone they love, not with the hot, disorganized energy of rage, the kind that spills outward and accomplishes nothing. He thought about them the way he had been trained to think about a problem that requires a solution, which meant he was thinking about information, about what he did not yet know, about the chain of steps between this moment and accountability. He drove. He had 16 hours before he reached her. He used the time. The road unrolled ahead of him in the October morning, the same washed-out blue sky that his sister had stared up at from the pavement, and Marcus Reeves drove through it with the specific quiet of man who is not panicking, who is not breaking, who is doing the thing that is harder and rarer and ultimately far more consequential than either of those things. He was thinking, and the men who had left his sister in the road were somewhere in that same morning, going about what they believed was their ordinary life, with no idea at all, that the calculation they had made on Powell Street, the one where they looked at a woman in the road and decided she was a problem they could simply drive away from, had already begun to fail, had already, without their knowing it, begun to come apart. The sparrow on the telephone wire had no idea. Neither did they. The surgeon's name was Dr. Felicia Okafor, and she had been doing orthopedic trauma surgery for 19 years, which meant she had delivered this particular category of news enough times that she had learned what did and did not help when delivering it. What helped? Directness. What did not help? Softening language to the point where the patient or the family member sitting across from you had to do the work of decoding what you actually meant. Dr. Okafor was a woman who respected people enough to tell them things clearly, and she sat across from Marcus Reeves in a small consultation room off the surgical ward and told him clearly. The left leg had sustained severe crush injury below the knee, tibia and fibula both fractured, the fibula in 3 places, significant soft tissue damage, the kind of vascular compromise that had required immediate intervention to prevent the loss of the limb entirely. They had saved the leg. That was the first thing. They had saved it. But the nerve damage was extensive, and the recovery path was long and uncertain, and what that meant in practical terms, she said the words and watched his face, which did not change, was that Maya might walk again, and might not, and they would not know for some time, and the time it took to know would be measured not in days, but in months. The right leg was less catastrophic, but not good. The soft tissue damage ran up to the hip. Multiple contusions, a hairline fracture at the femoral head that would be painful and slow and requiring its own management. She would be in the hospital for a minimum of 2 weeks. Rehabilitation, if and when she was ready for it, would be a long project. A year, possibly more. The pain management alone would need to be carefully structured. Dr. Okafor said all of this. She said it clearly and with a quality of presence that meant she was actually in the room with him, actually watching him receive this, not just delivering information from behind professional distance. When she finished, she asked if he had questions. Marcus had been sitting with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped between them, and he sat like that for a moment after she finished, looking at the middle distance, and then he looked at her and asked 3 questions in sequence. First, when could he see her? Second, who was managing her pain right now? And was it adequate? Third, did anyone contact the police? Dr. Okafor told Amaya was in recovery and he could see her within the hour. She told him the pain management protocol currently in place. On the third question, her expression shifted slightly. Not discomfort, more the recognition of a fact that she found unsatisfying. A patrol officer had come. There was a report. The truck had not yet been identified. Marcus nodded. He thanked her. He stood. He shook her hand with both of his in a way that conveys not just gratitude, but a specific kind of weight. And she later told a colleague that of all the family members she had ever sat across that table from, that man was the one who had made her feel most certain that whoever had hurt his sister was going to find that out. He went to the bathroom off the consultation room and locked the door and stood at the sink and ran cold water and held his wrists under it for about 90 seconds. This is a thing he had started doing in his 20s when he understood that he needed a physical mechanism for the thing that happened in his chest when something mattered too much. The cold water on the pulse points, the sensation grounding him in his body at the point where his body was most aware of itself. It worked. It had always worked. He dried his hands and looked at himself in the mirror, and the face that looked back at him was the same face it always was. Unremarkable, composed, the kind of face that does not advertise what is happening behind it. He went to find his sister. Maya was in a room on the 4th floor. She was awake, barely, in the specific swimming way of someone still metabolizing anesthesia, the eyelids heavy, the responses just a few beats slower than usual. There were tubes and monitors and the particular antiseptic underneath something else smell of hospital rooms, and her legs were beneath a thin blanket that was elevated at the end by a frame that kept the weight off the injuries. And she looked smaller than she was, the way people always look smaller in hospital beds, like the beds are scaled to some other category of person. She looked at him when he came in, and something moved across her face that was not quite a smile, and not quite relief, but was in the vicinity of both. She said, "You drove?" He said, "Flew to Richmond, drove from there." A pause. Faster. She said, "You hate flying commercial." He said, "I do." She said, "Okay." And then she was quiet for a moment, and the monitors made their steady sounds, and he sat down in the chair next to her bed and did not say anything either, because there are situations in which the most useful thing a person can do is be physically present without requiring anything of that presence. And Marcus understood this. After a while, she said, "I kept thinking about Diane's chicken." He said, "Who's Diane?" "Downstairs neighbor. I promised her jerk chicken." A pause, her eyes half closed. "She's been waiting." He said, "I'll talk to Diane." Maya said, "She's going to be so disappointed." She said it with the faint, drug-blurred version of her own humor, the corner of her mouth lifting. And Marcus looked at his sister making a joke in a hospital bed with a fractured leg and crushed nerve endings, and something moved in him that was not anger, that was something older and harder and more specific than anger. He sat with it. He did not show it. She fell asleep again about 20 minutes later. He stayed. The chair was bad. The kind of institutional chair that seems designed to prevent rather than enable sitting. But Marcus Reeves had slept in environments that would have made that chair look like a premium hotel, and discomfort was not a category he gave significant attention to. He sat, and he watched her breathe, and he thought. He had already been thinking for 16 hours, and the thinking had produced a shape. Not a plan yet. Plans require information, and he was still missing critical information. But a shape, a structure, a set of questions that needed answering before anything else could be decided. He was good at this. Better than good. The specific skill of moving from an unknown situation toward clarity through the systematic collection and assessment of information was not something that came naturally to most people, but it had been trained into Marcus Reeves over years and then refined over more years until it was as automatic as breathing. He pulled out his phone. He opened notes and began writing. The truck. He needed the truck, make, model, partial plate if possible, any identifying features. The route Maya had been running was one she ran regularly. This was important. Either the truck had been in that neighborhood for a legitimate reason and the incident was genuinely accidental, in which case the flight afterward made no sense at all, or the truck had been there for another reason, or had been there before and someone somewhere had seen it and could describe it, He wrote this down. The two men, the younger one and the older one. Maya had described them in the brief minutes she had been lucid enough to describe anything. The thick neck, the face she couldn't read, the older man's specific quality of calculation. These were small details, but they were something. People who move through the world with that quality of deliberate decision-making, the kind where you look at a woman in the road and make a rapid cost-benefit assessment and drive away, that is not a first-time behavior. That is a practice behavior. People who practice that behavior tend to exist in networks, in systems, in patterns that leave traces. He wrote this down. Patricia Chun, the woman who had found Maya. She would have seen the truck or the aftermath, or both. She had given a statement to the police. Marcus wanted to talk to her himself. He wrote this down. The police report. He needed the actual report, not the summary a nurse could give him, the document itself, every detail, every note the attending officer had written. This would require him to be physically present at the precinct, which he would do tomorrow. He wrote this down. He had 4 hours of Maya sleeping in front of him, and he used them. He called the precinct from the hallway and was told the investigating officer was not on shift, but would be in at 8 the following morning. He called a man he knew, a former teammate now in private security who had access to databases that the general public did not, and had a conversation he would not repeat to anyone about what those databases might or might not contain regarding commercial vehicle registrations in this part of the city. He called another number, a woman this time, someone who described herself as a consultant, but whose actual skill set was the kind that organizations with three-letter names found useful. She told him she would see what was in the camera networks on and around Powell Street from that morning. He did all of this in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning with the same tone he would use ordering food, because the quieter the thing, the more serious it is, and Marcus Reeves had long ago learned that volume is for people who need others to understand how much they care. The people who actually care tend to be much quieter. He went back to his sister's room and sat in a bad chair. He thought about the older man. The older man was the one who mattered. The younger one, the thick neck, the unreadable face, was a follower, a presence, someone brought along for weight or muscle or simply company. But the older man was the one who had looked at Maya and made the calculation, made the decision. The older man had been in that situation before, or a situation like it, because the speed of his decision-making was the speed of someone who already knew his answer before the question fully arrived. That is experience. That is a man who has driven away from a problem before and found that driving away worked. Marcus wanted to meet the older man. He was going to meet the older man. Outside the hospital window, the city was doing what cities do in the middle of the night. Not sleeping exactly, but quieted, the traffic thinned to something sporadic, the streetlights making their yellow pools on wet pavement from an earlier rain Marcus hadn't noticed, a cab moving slowly through an intersection below. Ordinary. The world doing its ordinary things while Maya breathed in the bed, and the monitors kept their time, and a chair made from the cheapest possible materials tried to convince Marcus's spine that this was a reasonable way to sit. He did not think about what came next in the vague way that people think about the future when they're angry and grieving and don't have a plan. He thought about it the way you think about a road. This turn, then that turn, then the destination. He had a shape. He needed the information. When he had the information, he would have the plan. When he had the plan, he would move. In the morning, Maya woke up at 6:15, which did not surprise him at all because she had always been incapable of sleeping past 6:30, even as a child, even now with painkillers in her bloodstream and fractured bones and everything that would have given a different person every legitimate reason to stay unconscious as long as possible. She opened her eyes, and he was there in the chair, and she looked at him for a long moment and said, "You're still here." He said, "Where would I go?" She said, "Marcus." A pause, the kind that carries a whole sentence inside it. He said, "I know." She said, "I know you know. That's why I'm saying it." He looked at her. She looked at him. The monitors kept their time. She said, "Tell me you're not going to do anything stupid." He said, "I'm not going to do anything stupid." This was true. He was not going to do anything stupid. Stupid was uncontrolled, unplanned, emotionally driven. Stupid got people hurt who were not the right people and failed to reach the people who were. Stupid was reactive. Marcus was not reactive. He was strategic. She read something in his face. She had always been able to read something in his face that other people couldn't. The way siblings who grew up close develop a shared vocabulary of expression that operates below language. And she said that's not actually reassuring. He said no. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you want to know what I remember about them?" He leaned forward. He took out his phone. He opened the notes. She talked for 40 minutes. She was exhausted and in pain and on medication, and she talked for 40 minutes with the careful precision of a woman who had been lying in a hospital bed for hours running through what she remembered and had organized it in her mind into a sequence she could transmit. She told him about the truck, white commercial box truck, a dent in the upper left corner of the rear cargo door, a red sticker of some kind on the back right side, partially torn. She told him about the older man's boots, work boots, steel toe, a specific shade of brown that she associated in her memory with something she couldn't place, a particular kind of construction site or industrial environment. She told him about the way the younger man had looked at her, not with cruelty, not with pleasure, but with the specific expression of a person who is choosing not to feel something they are in the process of feeling, which was its own information. She told him about the direction the truck had turned when it drove away. Marcus wrote all of it down. When she was done, she put her head back and closed her eyes, and her face was the face of someone carrying a weight that had not gotten lighter for being described. He looked at her. He thought. She ran every morning. She had run that route 300 times. She had a neighbor waiting on chicken. She had a patient at 8 named Earl who needed his hip worked on. She had plans for 11 days of phone calls she hadn't made yet. He thought, she's going to have to rebuild everything from the ground up, every plan, every routine, every casual assumption about her body and what it can do. And she's going to do it from this bed with this pain and this uncertainty. He thought, she's going to do it. He had no doubt about that. Maya Reeves was made of the same thing he was made of, which was the specific hard substance that produces people who finish their set even after receiving the worst news of their morning. But he thought, the men who made her have to do that. He looked at the notes on his phone, the dented cargo door, the red sticker, the steel-toed boots, the direction of the turn. He had a shape. He was getting information. The plan was beginning to fill in around the edges. The October morning was coming up outside the window, the same washed-out blue as yesterday, indifferent and beautiful and going about its business. Marcus Reeves pocketed his phone, stood from the terrible chair, and went to find some coffee and a precinct address. The men on Powell Street were somewhere in that same morning, going about their business, believing in the reliability of having driven away. They were wrong about the reliability. They were going to find that out. Not today. Today was for information. Today was for the methodical, patient, careful work of building something that, when it arrived, would be complete and unavoidable and precisely placed. But it was coming. It had been coming since a Tuesday morning and a sparrow and the sound of boots on pavement walking the wrong direction. It had been coming since Marcus Reeves was 37 pull-ups into his morning and his phone lit up with a Virginia area code and something that does not have a name sent him a signal before the nurse even finished her first sentence. He had answered. He was going to keep answering. The name came on a Thursday. Marcus had been in the city for 4 days. He had been to the precinct 3 times. The first visit produced a copy of the police report, a 15-minute conversation with the investigating officer, a man named Delgado who was adequate, thorough in the way of someone who has too many cases and not enough resources to be exceptional at any single one, and the information that no leads on the truck had yet materialized through official channels. The second visit was to add what Marcus had gathered independently, which included camera footage that the woman he'd called the consultant had pulled from 2 traffic systems and a private building camera on Powell Street that the initial investigation had not accessed. The third visit was because Marcus had already identified what he believed was the truck and wanted to understand how quickly the department intended to act on this. And the answer, "We're working on it, Mr. Reeves," was the kind of answer that told you precisely how much urgency the department was operating with, which was enough to get eventually to the same destination Marcus was heading to, just slowly, just procedurally, at the pace of institutions rather than the pace of results. Marcus operated at a different pace. The camera footage showed the truck turning north on Powell. North led to the industrial district that ran along the river, a corridor of warehouses, contractors, small commercial operations, the kind of neighborhood that operates mostly during business hours and is quiet and unmonitored outside them. The red sticker on the rear cargo door that Maya had described was visible in one frame of the footage. Not clearly, but enough that the consultant, who had tools for this, could enhance it to something legible. It was a contractor sticker, a logo, a small company. Marcus had the logo on a Thursday morning at 7:42. He recognized the name. Not because he had heard it before, he hadn't, but because recognition isn't always about prior knowledge. Sometimes recognition is the sensation of a thing clicking into the correct position, the place it was always going to occupy, and Marcus felt it when the message came through on his phone. Kellner and Sons Commercial Contracting. 4400 Riverfront Drive. He looked at the name for a long time. Then he forwarded it to Delgado. Then he drove to 4400 Riverfront Drive. This distinction matters. He forwarded it to Delgado first. He went to the official channel first. He gave the institution the opportunity to do the thing it was supposed to do. This was not naivety. This was the specific moral architecture of a man who understood the difference between justice and vengeance, who had thought carefully about that difference in the days since the hospital chair, who had arrived at a position that was neither simple nor comfortable, but was honest. He wanted the right outcome. And if the right outcome could be achieved through official channels, then official channels should be given the first attempt. But he was also going to drive to Riverfront Drive and look at the building. 4400 Riverfront Drive was a yard. A contractor's yard, a low office building at the front, modest, with a cracked parking lot, and a company sign that had lost one of the letters in contracting, so it read Kellner and Sons Commercial Contracting, which struck Marcus as the kind of detail that tells you something about the care with which an operation is run. Behind the office building was a chain link gate, and behind it a yard where equipment and vehicles were kept. He could see, from where he parked on the opposite side of the street, 3 commercial box trucks. White. He sat in his truck and looked at the yard. He was not going in. Not today. Today was just looking. Today was the part where you establish the terrain, understand the layout, count the entry and exit points, assess the rhythm of activity. When people arrive, when they leave, how many who stays. He had done this before in places where the stakes of getting it wrong were considerably higher than this. In places where getting it wrong meant something more permanent than a poor outcome. He had been trained to do this with the same patience required for doing it in those places. He watched for 90 minutes. 3 men arrived in personal vehicles between 7:50 and 8:20. One of them was older, heavy set, a particular kind of walk, the walk of a man who moves as though the ground is slightly below what he expects, a flat-foot, deliberate stride. He crossed the parking lot and went in through the main office door and did not look up. Marcus looked at the walk. He did not have a clear view of the face. He had the walk. He drove back to the hospital. Maya was sitting up when he arrived, which was new. Sitting up with her legs still in the elevated frame, but her body at a more assertive angle, and her phone in her hand, and a look on her face that was specifically the look of Maya Reeves, who has been lying in a bed for 4 days and has begun to find it incompatible with her personality. She was texting. She had texted 9 people, returned 14 messages, called Earl's alternate therapist to apologize personally for missing his sessions, organized Diane's jerk chicken to be delivered by a woman from Maya's church, named Birdie, who made her own version that Maya believed was inferior, but which she knew Diane would not notice the difference in, because Diane, as Maya explained to Marcus in a tone of genuine fondness, was a woman who cared about the gesture and not the execution. She had done all of this from a hospital bed on painkillers with 2 compromised legs. Marcus sat down, and she looked at him and said, "You've been somewhere." He said, "I've been driving around." She said, "Uh-huh." A pause. And he said, "And I found the company." The room got very still in the way of rooms where something important has just been said. She said, "Marcus." He said, "I gave it to Delgado. I gave it to him first." She said, "And then you drove there." He said, "I looked at the building." She set her phone down. She looked at her brother with the specific look of a woman who loves a person deeply enough to be honest with them in ways that hurt both parties. And she said, "I need you to let me tell you something." He waited. She said, "I know what you're thinking. I know what that look on your face is because I've seen that look since you were 12 years old, and Darnell Patterson took my bike, and you came home 3 hours later, and you never told me what happened, but Darnell Patterson walked funny for a week." A pause. "I'm on a bike, Marcus." He said, "I know." She said, "I'm your sister who has to figure out how to walk again. I'm your sister who woke up this morning, and the first thing I did was try to move my left foot, and it moved." She said this with a ferocity that was almost entirely concealed under the flat delivery. "It moved. It's not nothing. It's the first thing. and I'm going to keep working on the next thing and the next thing, and I'm going to do all of that. And the thing I need from you is to not be sitting in a prison somewhere while I'm doing it." He was quiet for a long time. She said, "I need you here, not handling it." "Here." He said, "I can be here and handle it." She said, "Marcus." He said, "Maya, listen to me." He leaned forward in the bad chair. "I'm not 12. I'm not going anywhere that ends with me in a cell. That would be stupid, and I've already told you I'm not doing anything stupid." He paused. "But I need you to understand something too. Those men looked at you in the road, and they made a choice. That is a thing that happened in the world, and it is going to have consequences, and the consequences are not going to arrive by themselves." She looked at him. He said, "I gave Delgado the company name. I'm going to keep giving him what I find, but I'm also going to make sure that the finding happens." She said, "And if the police don't move fast enough?" He said, "Then I'll figure that out when I get there." She said, "That's the most honest thing you've said." He said, "I know." She picked her phone back up. She looked at the screen, and then she looked at him, and she said, "Foot moved this morning." He said, "I know. You said." She said, "I said it because I want you to know what I'm doing while you're out there doing whatever you're doing. I want you to know what you're protecting." He looked at his sister. He thought about the morning she was born, which he did not actually remember because he was 3 years old, and 3-year-olds do not retain hospital waiting rooms with any fidelity, but which their mother had told them both so many times that it had become memory by repetition. The way she had said Marcus came running when the nurse brought Maya out, running on his 3-year-old legs across the linoleum, say mine, 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 not possessively, but in a way children claim the things that belong to their world, the things they want to keep. He still felt that. He was still 3 years old about it, under everything else. He said, "The foot moving is good." She said, "I know it's good." Delgado called that afternoon, not because Marcus had given him the company name, though that had started the process, but because by Thursday afternoon the investigation had also been escalated. A prosecutor named Whitfield had gotten involved. Whitfield, Delgado explained with a tone that landed somewhere between professional deference and barely concealed relief, was the kind of prosecutor who moved at a different pace than the department. She had issued a subpoena for company records, vehicle logs, and employment records at Kellner & Sons by 2 o'clock. By 4:30, her investigators had confirmed the truck, the dented cargo door, the red sticker. The vehicle was registered to Kellner & Sons Commercial Contracting, and the log showed it had been checked out on Tuesday morning to an employee named Raymond Holt. Raymond Holt, 53 years old, 22 years with the company. A prior, not vehicular, but adjacent. A civil judgment from 11 years ago where he had been found liable in a workplace accident involving another person's injury, an accident that the judgment characterized as having occurred through deliberate negligence, which was a legal phrase that carried a very specific meaning, which was that Raymond Holt had done something before, had known about it, and had chosen his action accordingly. Marcus stood in the hospital hallway with his phone and looked at the name Raymond Holt and thought about the walk, the flat foot, deliberate stride of a man crossing a parking lot with the certainty of someone who's gotten away with things before. He thought about Maya's foot moving. He forwarded the full Kellner & Sons address and Raymond Holt's name to 3 people he trusted: the consultant, the former teammate in private security, and a journalist he had met 2 years ago in a different context, a woman who covered accountability and civil rights and who was extremely good at her job. He sent the journalist everything that was publicly available: the civil judgment, the company registration, the subpoena, which was public record. He did not suggest a story. He just sent the information. He went back to Maya's room. She was asleep. The monitors kept their time. Outside the window, the October day was doing its fading, the light going amber and then gray, the city settling toward evening. He sat in the chair. He thought about Raymond Holt, who was somewhere in that same evening, maybe in a house, maybe having dinner, maybe already aware that something had shifted in the architecture of his situation and not yet understanding the full shape of what was bearing down on him. Maybe still operating on the assumption that driving away had worked, that the calculation was holding. The calculation was not holding. Marcus thought about the chain of things he had put in motion in 4 days from hospital chair. The information requests, the camera footage, the journalist, the name given to the prosecutor's office before the department had gotten there on its own. He thought about the thing his training had taught him that most people never learned, the thing that separated people who actually changed situations from people who just reacted to them. The leverage was not in the confrontation. The leverage was in the preparation, in the patient, systematic construction of a position from which the confrontation, when it came, was not a risk, but a certainty. He had not touched Raymond Holt. He had not needed to. The system was turning. Slowly, imperfectly, with the friction of all systems, but turning. And Marcus had added his weight to it in precisely the places where weight produced the most rotation. And there was still more to do. The younger man had not been identified yet. The company had employed several workers on rotating schedules. The journalist would ask questions that would produce answers. The prosecutor's office would pull employment records. The former teammate had already identified 2 additional cameras in the industrial district that the police investigation had not checked. More information was coming. The shape was getting more complete. Raymond Holt was going to be arrested. Marcus could feel this the way you feel the turn of tide. Not because you can see it yet, but because you understand the forces producing it. The arrest would happen. The charge would be serious. The civil judgment from 11 years ago would sit in a courtroom and tell its own story about the kind of man who looked at a woman in the road and drove away. Maya would have a case. A good one. The kind that produces outcomes. The night settled. Marcus ate something from the hospital cafeteria that he could not afterward identify as any particular food group. He sat in the chair. He stayed. He thought about the foot moving. He thought about the next thing, and the next thing, and the thing after that, and how Maya would attack each of them with the specific stubbornness of someone who had decided somewhere between the sky and the sparrow and the hospital ceiling that she was not going to be the thing those men tried to make her. He thought about Raymond Holt. He thought, we're coming. Not angry, not hot with it. The cool, settled certainty of a man who knows the terrain, has counted the exits, has placed his weight in the right places, and is simply waiting for the moment to arrive. It was going to arrive. Outside the window, the city did its nighttime things. Lights coming on, the last of the orange gone from the sky. The river somewhere in the dark below the industrial district, flowing past 4400 Riverfront Drive, past the lot with the 3 white trucks, and the sign missing a letter past the life that Raymond Holt was living on borrowed time. The river didn't know. Raymond Holt didn't know. Maya's foot had moved. The rest was already written.